We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the summer of 1987. Millions of Americans are celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution is the document that helped create our national government and made us not just Virginians or New Yorkers, citizens of one particular state, but Americans, free citizens of one nation, the United States of America.
The Senate and the House of Representatives met here in special session, and after, heads of government, industry, and the arts came to praise and explain the Constitution.
We will remember that the Constitution of the United States began as an idea in the hearts of people who met here 200 years ago to experiment with the possibility of self-government for we, the people. We, the people. We, the people.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the summer of 1776. Each of the 13 states voluntarily sent men to Philadelphia to a Continental Congress. On July 4th, 1776, they declared that the 13 colonies which had been ruled by King George III of England are and ought to be free and independent states, free to govern themselves and make their own rules and laws. This idea of freedom and independence was stated in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, the great patriot from Virginia, helped write the Declaration of Independence, which clearly stated the very principles behind the American Revolution and the Constitution.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to these rights governments are instituted among men, drawing their just power from the consent of the governed.
These ideas of equality and freedom inspired thousands of common men to risk their honor, liberty, and lives to free the 13 colonies from the leadership of the King of England. Each state worked together throughout the Revolutionary War, but each person felt allegiance to a particular state. If you were from Georgia, you felt allegiance to Georgia, just like those from New Hampshire felt allegiance to New Hampshire. For example, George Washington commanded the Revolutionary Army and believed all his troops should swear allegiance to the United States. He gathered men from New Jersey and asked them to pledge their loyalty to the United States. They were bewildered. How could they do this when New Jersey was their country?
To coordinate the war, the 13 states adopted the Articles of Confederation, which created a League of Friendship and allowed the Continental Congress to function. The Continental Congress could ask for money, but it could not force payments. It could declare war, but each state could decide whether to supply soldiers. This was a very weak central government, but fighting the common enemy of England kept them together. The soldiers suffered greatly because of the inability of the Continental Congress to adequately raise money. Sometimes, even in winter, many had no shoes. Fighting ended with the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, and the Revolutionary War was officially ended by the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The 13 colonies had become fully sovereign independent states, free from England and its king, yet not quite fully a nation. Just a league of friendship bound together with a common dream of freedom.
In the early days, members of Congress all went home and went down the street on horseback and gathered little crowds in the parks and talked to the little crowds together when Congress was out of session. There wasn't any such thing in those days, you know, as television, not even radio.
Life was slower then. Philadelphia had less than 40,000 people, and it was the largest city in the 13 states. Baltimore, New York, Boston, Williamsburg each had its own style, but most Americans lived on farms and worked hard. Much travel was done by river or sea because much of the land was still wilderness. Those early years were very difficult. States were quarreling and refused to adequately help each other. For example, New York taxed firewood from Connecticut and farm produce from New Jersey, and in turn many Connecticut merchants refused to sell their goods to New Yorkers. States printed their own paper money, much of which was of little value, but created vast confusion. Commerce grew difficult. Farmers fell into debt and lost their farms to banks. Finally, in Massachusetts, farmers could not pay their debts and taxes. Under Daniel Shay's leadership, they unsuccessfully marched in revolt against the state. Massachusetts asked the Continental Congress to help, but the central government was too weak to help. Changes were obviously needed. A more effective central government had to be created.
In the summer of 1787, 12 of 13 states sent 55 men to Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they wrote the Constitution and forged our nation. We were the United States in name only. Former Chief Justice Warren Burger expressed the problem clearly.
When these men met here exactly 200 years ago today, there was no perfect union. There was very little domestic tranquility. The states were at each other's throats about boundaries and about other matters. And the unity which they had exhibited during the Revolutionary War had largely disappeared.
Here are some of the greatest political thinkers in history. You may know some of them. George Washington, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. He probably could have been a new king, but he chose to be the first president, a position of limited power. As commander-in-chief, he had led the Revolutionary Army to victory. Only a deep sense of caring and duty led Washington to sacrifice years of his life to help create our nation. He presided at the Constitutional Convention. His leadership kept unity. He much preferred making improvements with the earth as a skilled Virginia farmer. Washington's patience, integrity, determination, and sense of justice led this country from revolution to peace. That is why he is called the father of our country. At the start of the Constitutional Convention, he said, "Let us raise a standard to which the wise and honest can repair. The event is in the hands of God."
Benjamin Franklin. In the heated debates of the convention, his humor, patience, wit, and wisdom continually instructed the delegates in the art of compromise and unity. His accomplishments in the 84 years of his life from 1706 to 1790 are staggering. He was a successful philosopher, author, publisher, diplomat, peacemaker, scientist, inventor, businessman, educator, philanthropist, and leader of men. As one of America's greatest sages, he helped found the University of Pennsylvania, an insurance company, a hospital, a workable postal system, the first circulating library, and philosophical and scientific societies. He invented bifocal lenses, the lightning rod, the Franklin stove, and a new printing press. He made great scientific discoveries related to the nature of electricity and even heat. Benjamin Franklin's work as a diplomat to France helped win the Revolution, and his negotiations with Britain helped bring peace.
James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, he led in calling for the Great Convention, kept the clearest vision of the structure of the new government, and through the Federalist Papers, which he wrote along with John Jay and Alexander Hamilton, explained and persuaded the people to accept the Constitution and the idea of the United States of America. Because Madison kept extensive notes, we have a record of the debates and proceedings at the convention. Through his deep insight into human nature and political process, he led in creating our government, which rests on the concept of a government with respect for majority rule and protection of minority and individual rights. Madison was particularly interested in protecting freedom of religion and expression, and can be called one of America's greatest human rights advocates. He later became our fourth president.
The summer was hot, the task difficult, and disagreements fierce. Alexander Hamilton wanted the president elected for life. William Patterson of New Jersey said smaller states should have as much power as larger states. Edmund Randolph wanted representation to be based on population, thus giving the larger states more power. Washington, Madison, and Franklin sought compromises which would create a strong central government. Compromises and fairness marked the endeavor. The Constitution that was created reflects that spirit of fairness.
I think the Constitution means fairness in a broad sense. You're fair to your neighbor, your playmate. We talk about the laws and we talk about justice. We really mean that it's a document that tries to make certain that we treat one another with respect.
They agreed on a government made of 3 parts with the power to control the government in the hands of we, the people.
Our Constitution provides that there be 3 branches of government, each equal to the other 2. One is the judicial, one is the legislative, and one is the executive.
The Founding Fathers described how our government should work in sections of the Constitution called Articles. Article 1 provides for the legislative or lawmaking part of our 3-part government. It is called Congress, and it is made up of 2 houses, the Senate, where each state, regardless of size, has 2 senators, and the House of Representatives, where representation is based on the population of each state. Since no law can be made without both houses agreeing, both large and small states were satisfied. Compromise was reached and Congress received many powers, such as the ability to gather taxes, make laws, coin money, and declare war. Article 2 created the office of the President, whose election takes place every 4 years. The President is the executive who must execute the laws. He or she is also Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The executive branch includes the Departments of State, Treasury, Agriculture, Defense, Health, Education and Welfare, Transportation, and the Attorney General. The President also has the right to appoint judges. Article 3 created the Judiciary, the branch of the government with the duty to interpret and apply laws. The Supreme Court, made up of 9 judges appointed for life, is the highest court in the land. It is the final authority in interpreting the law and thus decides whether the actions of people, including the President and the Congress, are in accordance with the Constitution. Under it are numerous other courts with lesser powers designed to apply justice through law.
Well, our founding fathers were enormously concerned about tyranny. King George III in England, who we fought a revolution to be free of. And they wanted a government where they could protect first the many against the few, and the few against the many.
Some say the genius of the Constitution is in the 3-part system with its checks and balances and the separation of powers. For example, the courts check the President and Congress to make sure laws are constitutional. The President appoints judges, but only with the advice and consent of the Senate. The President can veto a law unless Congress has a 2/3 majority in both houses. Congress makes laws, but elections of members of the House of Representatives are every 2 years, so we the people have a prompt check on Congress. Also, each state has reserved power. The separation of powers within the federal government and the dispersal of powers between the states and the federal government guards against any person or group of persons having too much power. After the first 3 articles were drafted and the form of our federal or central government laid out, 4 more articles were written. These provided that each state would honor the laws of the other states and guaranteed that the federal government would protect each state against violence or invasion. They knew the country would grow and change, so they provided for ways to amend or add to and change the Constitution. And they declared the Constitution to be the supreme law of the land, to which all presidents, judges, senators, and members of Congress must swear to uphold.
Every day when I consider a piece of legislation or a proposal for something to be made into law, the first question I ask myself, and that every legislator should ask himself, is it in accordance with the Constitution?
On September 17, 1787, after 39 delegates signed the great document, it was sent to the states for review and acceptance. 9 out of 13 states had to accept it. Each state held conventions, and the debate was sharp. Having just fought the revolution, men were reluctant to give authority to a central government they weren't sure they could control. Some states would not accept the Constitution until they were promised a Bill of Rights to protect individuals against the government. This Bill of Rights is found in the first 10 amendments. Their importance cannot be overestimated. In 1789, the first Congress met here and adopted the first 10 amendments or Bill of Rights, which were ratified by the states in 1791. They guarantee our liberties such as freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of travel, freedom of assembly, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and arbitrary arrest and punishment.
There are many parts of the Constitution which are important, and I would not want to say which is the most important, but one of the most important comes into the Bill of Rights, which establishes the limits as to what a government may do in dealing with the people.
The Constitution says that you can say pretty much what you want to say. The Constitution says that you can read whatever you want to read. The Constitution says that you can travel to wherever you want to go, and that the government in Washington doesn't have the right to say to you as a citizen, you can't go there, you can't go here, you can't read that particular book, or you can't give a speech which may be critical of the government. Those are very important, basic, and fundamental rights, rights which relatively few people around the world enjoy, but we in this country still do.
This living document has grown in its ability to adopt further expressions of justice. Some of this growth came through bloodshed and led to abolition of slavery. Other changes were through more peaceful dissent, such as gaining the vote for women. The flexibility of the Constitution is one of its strengths that many praised in Philadelphia at the celebrations.
In 1865, slavery was abolished by the authority of the 13th Amendment. The right to equal protection under the law was guaranteed by the 14th Amendment in 1868. The right of black men to vote was guaranteed by the 15th Amendment in 1870. But it would take women, half the population of America, for 200 years until 1920 to gain their right to vote under the authority of the 19th Amendment. And in 1971, the right to vote was extended to 18-year-olds. The 26th Amendment, but surely not the last.
It contains such a grand design. Its language is beautiful, clear and crisp, and its vision sublime. For the men who founded the country did not want to control others. They wanted the people to have freedom.
The Constitution is a piece of paper, but it's a very important piece of paper because what it is the framework for achieving the lofty principles set out in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths that all are created equal and given inalienable rights. It is the way we can put together a practical government to pursue justice. And so it is a piece of paper, but it's a very important piece of paper because it allows us to pursue justice in a society which therefore produces freedom and liberty for the people who live there.
It places power in the hands of we, the people.
The rights that the people of the United States have are rights that are theirs, not rights that have been given to them by government or by a king or anything else. Their rights belong to the people. And it isn't that way with a lot of governments throughout the world, and I think we ought to appreciate the fact that our government is a government that can only do what the people give it permission to do.
The preamble says so much.
When I was in the 6th grade, I was 10 years of age. My teacher made me memorize the preamble, the beginning, the hello part of the Constitution, and I hope all young people memorize it, because if you break it down, like they have you sometimes parse a sentence, it's very easy to understand. It's just, we the people of the United States in order to. And you pause there when you're memorizing it. Think of it as a shopping list coming after that. In order to do what? To form a more perfect union. That's to bring the 13 colonies together. To establish justice. It's where our whole court system comes from, and the Supreme Court, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense. And the last one is very important, to promote the general welfare.
When the Constitution was first written, the three most important words were probably "we the people." But they had a very different meaning then. There were an awful lot of people back then in 1787 who weren't included. For example, women were not permitted to vote. Black Americans were not permitted to vote. Native Americans, American Indians were not permitted to vote. You had to own property to be able to vote. So an awful lot of people, even though it said "we the people," really weren't covered by the Constitution at all. So it didn't start off perfectly, and it's still not perfect today, but it's really taken 200 years to get where we are. And I think that's the important message of the Constitution, that during this bicentennial we're concentrating an awful lot on the Founding Fathers in